I thought I'd start out initially talking about some of the things you need to think about before getting into a kind of program. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how GRIP works and how we actually have a couple of programs melded together into the GRIP program to try to make it a little bit easier for private landowners to work with our various partners of the Oaks and Prairies joint venture. And I want to also mention we have 10 staff that right now that work for the Oaks and Prairies joint venture, and we work in at least 3 different organizations pay our salaries. I work for the American Bird Conservancy. We've got a bunch of partners that biologists that work for the Quail Forever, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, and we have one Texas Parks and Wildlife employee that is a regular staff member of the Oaks and Prairies joint venture. So we're kind of a true joint venture in that the organizations come together as a partnership, but each maintains their individual identities and work together to share the rewards and risks of trying to achieve our goals, which is increasing habitat for bird populations and doing a lot of good stuff with private landowners and with providing the ecosystem services that maintain human life. But we use birds as kind of our barometer of the health of the land. So just to get into it, one of the things you want to start with when you think about getting into working with an agency or organization that has an incentive program is you want to be able to begin with a solid grasp of your goals and objectives. Whether you have a small property or large property, you want to think about what you want to do with the land and what you're willing to do to meet the objectives of some of these programs. So whether you're project oriented or production oriented, ranching and crop farming, and just want to maybe work on the edges to make some wildlife habitat, or whether you're fully wildlife oriented and want to talk about deer or turkey or quail or monarchs or pollinators or grassland birds, there are programs out there that address some of those, and our Grassland Restoration Incentive Program is just one.
You really okay if I put the speaker towards me?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah.
There's also, thinking about water quality and erosion control, soil health programs, and healthy ecosystem management. And you also want to think about, are you intending to maintain the tax benefits of agriculture with wildlife? There are programs for that you can find out about. So not only do you want to think about your objectives, but you want to think short-term and long-term. Where do you want to be next year, and where do you want to be in 10 years? And certain practices can help meet some initial goals while putting in place, preparing for the longer term goals. So you want to think 2 and 5 and 10 years down the road of, what are the holes in your bucket and which ones should you fix first? The lower holes that are going to be draining water a long time, or the upper holes as kind of a metaphor. And, we do most of the work that we do is for wildlife conservation. So we're thinking for wildlife species about 4 things, basically: water, food and forage, cover, and space for the species. So think about where's the water in the landscape, and what's it going to look like at the property level and at the kind of your neighbor level and community level, and out from there. And then how much grass and forbs are present? Is it adequate to sustain your operation while taking into account that you have wildlife that are also browsing on the forage? And if not, is it due to brush encroachment? Just succession of woody encroachment coming into a grassland area, or do you have an invasive species problem, or monoculture, or all of them? These are all common causes that decrease forage production and can be dealt with through various management practices. And then thinking about, is adequate cover being left or present during the nesting season? So not only do you want to think about things in space, but in time. Do you have it are you going to have grass in the next growing season? And maybe you want to consider adding rotational grazing system or maintaining an average of 8 inches of grass and forbs over the land. But some areas will have taller grass, some areas will have 8 inches, and some might have less, depending on how big an area you have to work with. And even the really short grass is used by some of the wildlife species. Over here, right in the middle of that picture is a grasshopper sparrow in a recently burned grassy area. So they will find a way to use the land. So using these 4 key aspects, you can get a bunch of options to begin creating a customized management plan and setting up for the completion of your goals while still meeting your short-term goals. And you want to be open to suggestions on what your property needs. Your land the best, but the biologists, are kind of trained and have worked in your area or on similar properties and might have some ideas that might help you accomplish your goals. But you certainly don't have to take all of the ideas. And then
they're recording it, so I can at least watch it later. But man,
okay. Somebody's talking. It's not muted. So from a wildlife perspective, realize that not everything needs to be neat and tidy. Wildlife like kind of messy management. People don't. So I'd like to say, think about mindful, messy management where you could have some unmowed areas, but if there's a fence around it, then people think it's pretty. If you put up a sign that says this is bird habitat, people think it's okay, but otherwise they would call it weeds. So there are ways to get around some of those issues. For technical guidance and programs, you want to know who can help locally and is kind of maximizing the resources available. And there are multiple organizations in Texas with different programs that can help. Initially, the big one you can start with is your local NRCS office, the Natural Resource Conservation Services. They have the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, is one of their biggest programs designed to help landowners meet their goals through government cost sharing of management practices. And they can provide technical guidance to help design and implement grazing plans, developing seed lists, and other infrastructure. They also have other programs that the USDA has offered, but for new landowners, EQIP can help jumpstart your operation and get you headed in a good direction. To contact you want to start by contacting your county NRCS office or Farm Service Agency at the USDA office, and then find out, does NRCS have a conservation plan on your property? Have there been previous conservation practices on your property? If so, what were they? And do you have any CRP or anything along those lines that requires maintenance? Some of these contracts are 10 years long, and by year 5, the grassland has turned into shrubland and needs some kind of mid-contract management. So some of the programs have that in, and our friends at Texan by Nature have put together a Texas Landowner's Guide to Land Conservation and Management, and you might want to check that out and look for
check that out
on how to access various programs. We also work a lot with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. We have one staff member of the Oaks and Prairies joint venture that is a Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist. I started my job as a Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist. So they can help draft wildlife management plans, and they have prescribed burn crews, and they have other programs like Pastures for Upland Birds and their managed land deer programs. You can contact the Parks and Wildlife biologist and find out if they've worked on the property before, if there's a wildlife management plan already in place, or if they have time to come out and evaluate the property. And if you're intending to maintain agricultural tax benefits with TPW, can assist you in writing a 1D1 tax valuation form to submit to your county tax office. And the property must have been previously in agriculture production to qualify, but that's something that a lot of people want to look into to start managing for wildlife rather than agriculture, especially on smaller properties. So finding a Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist is not too difficult. You can go on Google and type in Texas Find a Wildlife Biologist, and it'll take you to their website, and you could click on your county. I'm in Williamson County in Round Rock, and for Williamson County, it brings up a list of different biologists, starting with your local wildlife biologist, who usually covers 1 or 2 counties. It happens to be that the one in Williamson County was vacant. Then there's urban biologists who will work near cities, and this one kind of covers the Austin area. And then Derek Walters, who was our wildlife biologist, but now he's the senior wildlife biologist, covers a larger area. And then Nathan Raines is his boss. So you kind of get a list of people that you can contact within Texas Parks and Wildlife and their phone numbers, and start asking them questions and seeing if they'll come out and evaluate your property and talk to you about wildlife management practices. There's also AgriLife Extension, which have a lot of great resources at their disposal, and they offer continuing education courses and workshops across the state, and they have offices within a lot of the counties, and will provide information. Another one we work with a lot is prescribed burn associations, that are kind of landowner-led organizations that help each other, putting prescribed fire in different areas. This may or may not be an accurate map of the counties that have prescribed burn associations. I know we're talking about Fayette Prairie area, which is down in here. The map is kind of, because it's the burn associations are kind of volunteer organizations. They're not always up to date, but they're getting there, and we've been working to assist them with different resources. So you can get general information about fire and get to see a prescribed burn in action. I tell people prescribed fire is the cheapest, fastest way to do management, but it's also, you know, genetically scary to us. It's programmed in our brains that fire is bad. So you kind of figure out what you're comfortable with and what you're willing to do, but we kind of try to build things towards using prescribed fire to maintain the land, because that's kind of what it was set up for, especially in Texas. So you call up any one of these folks, and we also have, like I said, the Oaks and Prairies joint venture staff, and they'll come out for an initial visit, and either visiting with Texas Parks and Wildlife or NRCS for information gathering purposes to evaluate the property. And you'll want to bring information, and so you want to talk about kind of previous conservation practices, such as prescribed fire, whether you've done it, how often, do you have existing fire breaks, brush management, how was that practice implemented? Was it grubbed or dozed or sprayed? Did you do any range planting, and what was in the seed mix, and prescribed grazing? What was the previous stocking rate, and what species grazed? And then going back, you always want to know what your goals and your objectives are. And if you start with that, then you can build kind of practices and options to get you to where you want to go, no matter what happens with the weather in Texas. And so as a conservation organization, when we work with private landowners, we're looking for kind of win-win-win situations where maybe we can meet some of your objectives for your land, and then also meet some of our objectives for our organization, which in our case, it's bird conservation and creating habitat for declining bird species. And in other cases, it might be deer, it might be monarchs, it might be water quality, it might be soil quality, but your objectives, our objectives, and then also the third win is kind of, you know, if we can do this in enough areas and consider the surrounding landscapes, the whole ecosystem and community benefits, and that's our win-win-win situation that we're looking for. So you can talk about multiple objectives and get multiple opinions. And sometimes the NRCS and Texas Parks and Wildlife, as a federal and state agency, they have rules about sharing names and sharing personal information about folks, but you as the landowner can ask for NRCS to talk to Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they can have different opinions. And when they come to evaluate the property at the same time, you can get them to talk about their concerns at the same time and have potential improvement ideas from at least two perspectives. And then there are other options with some of the other organizations that I'll talk about in a second. But the state and federal agencies can't talk to each other unless you tell them that you want them to. So that's one power that you have that we recently learned about that is an impediment for NRCS biologists and parks and wildlife biologists. They'll visit the same property, walk past each other, and give different advice, and it'll leave everybody confused as to what should be done. But if they're made to talk to each other, then they can work things out. And then last but not least is where the Oaks and Prairies joint venture and a lot of our partners fall, looking into non-government or partner organizations and joint ventures, which is a specific kind of organization. So non-governmental organizations include the Hill Country Alliance, the Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, like I mentioned, the Nature Conservancy, National Audubon, National Wild Turkey Federation, and Ducks Unlimited all have various programs that can help out. And I'll tell you in a little bit about how to access some of those. And they have the ability to provide technical guidance or cost share opportunities besides the bigger federally known options through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And then the joint venture partnerships, which is, the Oaks and Prairies is just one of 5 in Texas. We're building technical guidance and cost sharing programs. And there's a map on our Oaks and Prairies joint venture, OPJV.org website, where you can look up and see all of the 5 different joint ventures. So the Oaks and Prairies goes right up the middle from San Antonio to Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's a Lower Mississippi joint venture with their conservation network, the Gulf Coast joint venture with their sea grip, and then the Rio Grande joint venture to the south and to the west that have their South Texas grip program, and then the Playa Lakes joint venture, which has some of their available programs. So there's a lot of folks getting into the technical assistance and financial assistance game, because that's where we're going to make gains with these species. Texas is 95% private land, and a lot of species, especially the grassland birds, are their homes are on private land. So we're making big investments in helping to manage those lands. So back to what originally was the title of my talk, the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, getting a grip on grassland conservation. Like I said, we have 10 staff and 3 organizations that are working together to kind of deliver this program and support it. And what the Oaks and Prairies joint venture is, who runs the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, is a group of partner organizations that are working together. We've got state, federal, and non-government or NGO partners all working together to increase priority bird populations, and have accepted the responsibility to try to do that, because it's a big job. So it takes a lot of organizations all pulling in the same direction. And we cover 60 million acres from, like I said, San Antonio, which is this gray blob down here, all the way up to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and everything in between. The Gulf Coast joint venture covers Houston, but we've got all the big cities, and then we've got these counties out here and counties down here, which could be up to 90% agricultural land. So it's a really diverse landscape, and lots of fun to work in. So what our main job has been since I started the job in 2007 was to address grassland bird conservation. Grassland birds are literally our canary in the coal mine. They're indicating that by their population declines that there's something going on in the environment that probably isn't going to be good for us, pretty soon if we don't start to deal with it. Birds react to environmental change as we do, and sometimes faster. They can migrate too. So if they're moving out of an area, that indicates there's something going on. They are our leading indicator of ecosystem health. And there's a recent report that came out that calculated 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. And of those 3 billion birds, 1/4 of them, or 720 million, were grassland birds. And just the eastern meadowlark alone, since 1970, 3 out of 4 eastern meadowlarks, which is a super common grassland bird even now, have been lost. So just imagine, since 1970, there were 4 times more eastern meadowlarks out there in the grasslands. So, and these birds, they don't just live here. They live here all year. Some of them migrate. So this is recent data that's showing the field sparrow up from eBird, and they put it together, a whole bunch of these cool animations showing the population, down here will be here in the winter, and then as it goes up to the breeding season, this is June and July, no field sparrows, and then they come back. So we got to not only think about the birds that are here all year round, but that are only here for certain parts of the year, and these field sparrows are here for 9 months out of the year. So pretty important area for them. So what we've done as an organization is put together a grassland bird conservation business plan that you can again see on our Oaks and Prairies joint venture website. And we calculated the current population trend of, this could be any grassland bird, but northern bobwhite is kind of our flagship species. They've declined by 6% a year. And if you can imagine what your bank account would look like after 30 years at 6% a year loss, it's not a good picture. And we figured out that if we let things go, that this population is going to level out somewhere pretty low. And if we do certain strategies, each of the strategies will put that leveling off at a higher level that we feel is more acceptable. So our big strategies provide incentive programs through our Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, which I'll talk about in a second. And our big goal is, it's a 60 million acre area. We want to do 3 million acres of good grassland management over 10 years, or 5% of that 60 million acres of the Oaks and Prairies joint venture. So it's a pretty massive goal when you start thinking about it and how much it takes. And every bit of it is acre by acre with various landowners. So what we put together is this Grassland Restoration Incentive Program to provide incentive payments to help private landowners do conservation practices on the ground. And it works in parallel and with USDA Farm Bill programs. And we wanted to kind of focus it. So we have 30 eligible counties in Texas and 10 counties in Oklahoma. And you can see Washington, Austin, Colorado, Fayette, Lavaca, Gonzales, DeWitt, Karnes, and Wilson. The Fayette Prairie runs right up the middle of these counties. And so does a lot of the recent fracking. So we've been working in this area for 10 years. I've been counting birds in especially Austin and Colorado County, but all these counties spent lots of time over the past 10 years in these counties, so know them well. And what we try to do is have a list of practices that basically try to return land, restore land to the kind of native conditions that can be managed with grazing and fire. And so we have this pyramid of trying to push the rock up the pyramid of we want to remove invasive and woody vegetation plants, and that usually involves a lot of brush clearing, a lot of mechanical clearing, expensive stuff, $450 an acre, as much as, and then up to planting desirable stuff, and then push it up past into grazing, and a place where grazing and fire can maintain those areas. And fire is our cheapest, fastest practice, and we pay about $18 an acre to cover 50% of the cost for prescribed fire, which is about the cost that NRCS uses for their programs. And so since 2014, we've done over 200 projects, a total acreage of 106,000 acres. And remember, our goal was 3 million acres over 10 years. And in 5-6 years, we've done 106,000 acres. So we're still working towards that goal, but we've done a lot of work, and that's over $2.2 million in total agreements so far, with all of these partners kind of pulling the train for us. So just in 2020, during the COVID year, we did a whole lot of prescribed burning and some prescribed grazing, and then moving to some brush management, which, down in the Fayette Prairie area, those counties down there, it's more about smaller land ownership and brush management relative to our northern areas, which is more about prescribed grazing and 10,000 acre ranches and stuff like that. So we tend to spend a lot more money in our southern counties than in our northern counties on practices, because it's a lot more intensive brush management that is needed to push back some of the all kinds of woody plants that are invading our grasslands. And what we can figure out, going back to the birds, based on some of the models and monitoring that we've been doing, is with that 106,000 acres, we've been able to create over 1,600 northern bobwhite territories, about 10,000 dickcissels, eastern meadowlark, another 4,000 or so, painted bunting, 7,600, and scissortail flycatchers, 22,000. And that all depends on their territory size and the type of habitat that they need. But these are estimates, but these are the outcomes of what we're trying to do. And we're not just counting acres now, we're actually documenting bird populations increasing, which is a really hard thing to do. And so some of the practices that we do in some of the areas, we've done prescribed fires in Archer and Clay County. These are some of the northern counties, 250 acres at a time. Up in Throckmorton County, this bobwhite quail was spotted while we were doing a technical assistance follow-up. So we get to see some of the fruits of the labor as we follow along with the projects. In Stevens County, this project had 1,556 acres of all kinds of practices: brush management, range planting, cross fencing, prescribed grazing, and fire breaks. And as you can see, we like the pictures of the prescribed fire. This is renewing the grasses in the area and allowing for a young growth, which will create the habitat conditions that we need. In Stevens County, 24 acres of prescribed fire, which is right at the bottom limit of the size of practices that we'll do with our GRIP program, because we're trying to do at least one territory size of a northern bobwhite, which is about 25 acres. So a minimum of 25 acres is what's needed for GRIP, but will help you get to the other programs if you need to. But this came from the cooperator. I had a pretty amazing experience back in August. I was driving along the field and burned a couple years ago around dusk when I saw what I thought was a dove get up in front of my truck and land 30 yards ahead of me. As I got closer, I realized it was not a dove, but a quail. And I got out and tried to get closer to get a picture when the rest of the covey busted and flew into the cedars. I think there were close to 25 or 30 birds, and most of them were from this year's hatch. I was elated to see quail again, especially in next to our burned fields. So a lot of happy landowners so far with what we're doing. This one was kind of wordy. The next one in Austin County, which I wanted to show kind of a local county, is a range planting where, the first year, second year, it doesn't look like much is happening. And then by the third year that some of the grasses come in, this 50-acre range planting, the text was, "Check this stuff out. I feel like I'm doing something now." So happy landowners, happy cooperators, happy birds, and that's what we're going for. So just to give you an idea of if you're in some of these southern counties, Washington, Austin, Fayette, Colorado, Lavaca, Gonzales, DeWitt, Karnes, and have at least 25 acres, we can talk to you about GRIP, but if you have less than 25 acres that you're looking to manage and want to do something, we'll also can either contact your Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist or NRCS or any of the folks that are listed on here. I know Thomas Yankee is on the Zoom right now, and he's our kind of our prescribed fire specialist, but Ty Higginbotham is in Karnes and Wilson County, and he'd be your kind of first contact for any of these counties. Amber Brown is also kind of covers Karnes and Wilson County, and she could help out. Like I mentioned, Thomas is on this Zoom, and he is in the Edwards Plateau and Marble Falls exactly, but he's kind of specializing in prescribed fire. Derek Wiley is up in Throckmorton, so if you're not in the kind of the Fayette Prairie area, he's up in Throckmorton, but he's our Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist that covers all of the Texas area. And then Ryan Piltz is down in Rosenberg, and he actually has a position that is associated with mussel conservation. So kind of dealing with the waterways, but the uplands of the waterways through Austin and Washington County, and then down into some of the Gulf Coast prairie areas. So if you need someone to contact, all of them are great contacts. And of course, on the bottom, that's my email. And I'm up here in Wilson County, kind of organizing contracts and getting people in the right places. So I can help out, but the folks listed above me are the ones that are really where the rubber hits the road and doing the conservation practices. And with that, thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.